in our city actually went through a project labor agreement process. And other cities since then have adopted that in California. And we know that project labor agreements, not just in my state, but in places across the country, have been very successful. They've been around for decades and critical to a good workforce. We know they've been used from everything, not just in major construction projects, but also in our schools, our universities, transportation, green energy, and they've been a key component to both public and private sector jobs as well. This has been a huge boon for the economy back in California and certainly back home in my city. We know that this policy has been good for working families and also makes financial sense. It's really important to note also there's been a lot of discussion about the supply chain over the last couple of years and around strengthening ports, of which bring in cargo in and out, of course, across the United States. Most of port construction that is happening on the West Coast and much on the East Coast are under these project labor agreements, specifically so that these important, large infrastructure projects actually don't stop, that there's a clean process, and that they move forward to not interrupt the supply chain. So the impact to the economy and to America's ports around project labor agreements is critically important. When Republicans attack project labor agreements, it's not just an attack on working people, it's an attack on the right to organize, it's an attack on historic investments, and it's a direct attack on our nation's infrastructure. And this bill, of course, doesn't just stop at overturning President Biden's executive order. It would be essentially a blanket ban on all project labor agreements where any federal funding is used. And so any project, whether it's federal government project, a state or local jurisdiction, or even in the private sector, could see these protections rolled back. It's really, again, an attack on working people. And we also now know that this bill is not just limited to new construction, but any facilities that receive federal funding that are maintained under a project labor agreement. And we have many of these back home in the city of Long Beach and across the state of California. These would also be targeted, threatening even more American jobs. And so even if you don't agree with PLAs or think they're not the best for any certain situation, a vote for this legislation completely eliminates their use for any project that uses federal funding, and that is absolutely outrageous and shameful. It jeopardizes the livelihoods of constituents in every congressional district, opens essential projects up to the possibility of additional costs and delays, and harms our ability to maintain and improve infrastructure that we all depend on. We know that there has been study after study across the country that have concluded that PLAs attract, by the way, a similar number of bidders and have been associated with equivalent or lower costs oftentimes than projects without them. So eliminating PLAs across the board for projects with federal funding is really an open attack on working people, on the American middle class, and Republicans in this committee and across Congress are pushing for it at a moment where we should literally be doing the opposite. We should be increasing the workforce. We should be creating more local hiring jobs across the country. I find it also interesting that Republicans who voted and who have voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and who are now, by the way, praising these projects and going across the country and celebrating these projects back in their district, many of these projects were built with project labor agreements. And so we can go on and on talking about projects across the country that Republicans are now praising that they voted against that were actually project labor agreement projects. And so I want to actually thank President Biden and his leadership for the Infrastructure Reduction Act, for his work on the bipartisan infrastructure agreement, because communities are finally getting the resources that they need. I also want to just add that most project labor agreements have a local hiring component. And what that essentially means is that we're able to not just hire from the region or anywhere in the state, but actually from that community. So in California, in my city, we have a percentage where the actual workers need to come directly from the city and the region. So you're ensuring that your local folks actually get these jobs. And so this is ensuring local residents, and it's ensuring that projects get built on time across the state and back home. So for us back home, project labor agreements have been a game changer. Above all, this bill and this really attack abandons a promise we've made to hardworking men and women across the country. And so I absolutely oppose any efforts to roll back project labor agreements. And with that, I yield back the remainder of my time.